Welcome to Annunciation Radio's Faith with Reasons, the program that examines what the church teaches and why. Faith with Reasons.
Well, welcome aboard. Glad you could make it. Glad you could join us today. Ron Finn here along with Shayne Stanfield, and happy to be here for this December 6th, show number 472. Shayne Stanfield, how are you?
I'm wonderful. How about yourself?
Good. Are you all having a good Advent so far?
So far, so good. Oh, we're first weekend, so and it's the short one.
Yeah, but you got to get it all in because it's
it's
only
the short one.
3 weeks and a half a day.
Yeah, supposedly the shortest Advent that we have in the life of the church.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a wonderful guest in studio today. We've been talking about Professor Pete, the Bible teacher at Lourdes University. Peter Sibilio, who, whenever he's here, it becomes the smartest person in the room.
Absolutely.
Because
whenever I'm here by myself.
Yes. No, you are.
I got here early, and I was the smartest person in the room, but I relinquished that.
Well, see, it takes two of us to, and we're still, I don't think we're still quite there yet.
That's right. So, Professor of Theological Studies at Lourdes University, you lead the MA in Theology course.
Yes.
You're inviting people to the next cohort for getting their masters.
It is things, the calendar, all these things you've been talking about. We had been looking at, and we still are looking at, maybe combining the Masters in Theology with the Masters in Education, because everybody knows the diocese is desperately in need of wonderful theology teachers.
Yeah.
But we also have a new president who said, well, maybe we can just do both. Right? And so the key is coffee, right? We have a cup that says purgatory here, and, it might seem like purgatory for you, but call me up and let's have coffee and see what you'd like to do. Anything from maybe that combined degree to the Masters in Theology to Tuesday night Greek class. We've started, but we're still working on that alphabet. So there is plenty of time to join that too. And hey, the last time I was here, we got people in. I see the name Liz Ebby, and I saw Liz last night.
Nice.
And so she's already, I just got the books. Don't quiz me yet.
All in due time.
And I was like, come on, the Greek alphabet, we have like drunk frat initiates reciting this, as well as 4 and 5-year-olds in Athens.
That's right. So how's everything going for you?
Well, we started our exams at Lourdes, and I hope I pass. But as you can see, I'm in desperate need of a haircut, but I thought I would leave it long just so I have something to pull out of my head.
Oh, there you go.
Well, I'm begging students to turn something in.
That's the Einstein look. I kind of like it.
Well, that's where the similarities end.
The advantage of coming into the studio is you can kill two birds with one stone. You can
yes,
just go next door and take care of that.
That's true, but I'm afraid that would be heresy.
Oh.
If I said
that was supposed to be for this morning. So,
Ooh. Wow, that's all I can say. My goodness. Let's see. I've got something for that. I believe. Yeah, that's
there we go.
So, anyhow,
heresy just actually comes from a word meaning you picked up something bad.
Oh, really?
And so that's kind of my audition for Word of the Day.
Nice. So is that Greek or is that what?
That is Greek, and they often did think of bad theology or bad belief as almost like an illness. Who's famous for slapping a heretic at the Council of Nicaea, but none other than St. Nicholas.
And today is his day.
That's right.
Yeah. Which we should kick it off by talking about St. Nicholas a little bit.
Yeah, we were talking about that this morning and kind of musing to ourselves, is that legend? Did that really happen? I don't think it did.
He was a bishop, right? So,
yes.
Yeah, so imagine that, a bishop going after another bishop and popping him in the face or the nose or something. So
we don't have really great sources, and we actually think think that he became so popular in southern Italy that his body, of course, was stolen, and relics start showing up in southern Italy. And of course, St. Nicholas Day is very, very big there. But we really don't have that many great sources about him. But of course, the legends are that, of course, he is a defender of the faith at Nicaea in 325, and that he suffered. He was able to speak from his experience, supposedly ordained a bishop in southern Turkey at a very young age, around the age of 20. Soon after that, he was around AD 300. He was actually imprisoned under Diocletian's persecutions, but then released under Constantine.
Wow.
And so he had every right to speak because he'd already suffered for the faith.
I'm sure he's probably very fortunate that he made it out of that.
Yes. And not only did he never back down, but he kept going after that. And so we have stories of miracles and calming of the sea, but perhaps he's most famous for really hating this practice of women having to come with dowries in order to secure good husbands. And so we have this story about how when he was bishop, he would specifically raise money and gather money for the secret purpose of giving it away to poor families so that fathers could secure good families for their daughters. And so as not to shame the fathers, he, as legend goes, would drop the gold in stockings at night. And that's where we get the story of gifts in stockings. And as St. Nicholas became more and more famous and his reputation traveled north, St. Nicholas became Sinterklaas. And so, yes, Virginia, there really is a Santa Claus. It's a shortened form of St. Nicholas.
Absolutely.
Wow. Yeah, very, very cool.
And it all comes from his love of family and his mission to protect women from being forced into trafficking or terrible lives. And really, that's where we have this idea of giving Christmas gifts and Santa Claus, right? It's someone standing up for the faith intellectually, but also as a pastor in the way he lived it out and gave gifts.
So for those of our listeners that aren't familiar with the purpose of the dowry, so the money of money is presented to the family of the groom.
Yes.
And because that was it a form of law? Was it a form of tradition? Was it a way of honoring? Was it a way to set them up as a gift?
Or D, all of the above.
All of the above. Okay.
It's one of the reasons why you tend to have families not marry outside of their economic rank, because marriage really was a sort of bonding of families. And the young man, not as young as his wife, right? So, maybe 18, 19, 20 or older, would present himself perhaps through his father to the father of the woman. And he would have to show that he could support her and offer a sort of gift, a bride price in some cultures, to the father of the bride. Her father then would send what would be her inheritance if she were a man, which he wasn't, of course, with her as a dowry at the wedding. And so they kind of had to be relatively equal. The groom showed that he was a stand-up guy and could support the father's daughter, and that he was very interested in bonding families. Okay, and the father had put all this money into his daughter, and he should get a little refund on that cost of college and stuff that. And so the groom comes up with a bride price, and then the father in turn says, well, my sons inherit from me. So the daughter comes with a dowry to show that I'm a stand-up guy. And so it really was this sort of bonding between families, but no pay, no play.
Yeah.
And St. Nicholas thought that was just dehumanizing. And you can't have a family of faith if you don't have families and family values. And really, that's where stockings and Christmas presents come from.
And I did hear something similar to this, and it might have even been today, because we are celebrating his feast day today. But the idea that there were a lot of widows that had daughters that had not been married, and they couldn't marry because the widows didn't have a source of income or
they
had very
were
little.
Excluded.
Yeah. So this was the way for the daughters to be married off, and it would be less stressful for the the widows. In other words, less mouths to feed.
He is every bit as much of a pastor, and real agent of social change as he is a famous theologian.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Professor Pete's in studio. Peter Sibilio is here, and boy, oh boy, I love it this time of year when you come in because there's so much to talk about. There's Advent and there's Christmas and all these wonderful Advent saints like St. Nicholas and so forth. But we're into Advent now, and we won't be very long.
No.
It's just the way the calendar works.
I was just thinking about that. It seems like in our secular culture, we start looking ahead to Christmas. It used to be Christmas in July. Now Christmas starts in July.
Well, Black Friday was November 1st, I think.
I think you're right. Wow. And it's just, I just have this feeling that in a way, it's strange. It's almost backwards that we start getting ready for Christmas so soon, and yet I have this feeling Advent has just started, but it's going to be over before you know it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's because I love the season of Advent or because I looked at the calendar and we have to get back to Lourdes earlier than any other school. I think that's
or a little of both.
Probably all the above.
So for those who haven't been paying attention, we celebrate the third Sunday of Advent on obviously the Sunday, which is actually Christmas Eve.
Well, that's the fourth Sunday,
right? So we've got
Advent.
so it's
I'm sorry,
17th, right? Is that if I'm doing the math?
Sounds right.
Correct?
Well, isn't it the third? Isn't it the third?
The third
Sunday is on Sunday, and then they have to celebrate the fourth Sunday at the opening of the vigil.
Yes.
Yeah, because it's the vigil mass on Saturday night. It would be the fourth Sunday of Advent, and of course in the morning on Christmas Eve would be the fourth Sunday of Advent.
Yes,
and then once you hit 4:00.
Yes.
Then it's the vigil mass for Christmas.
I remember this from when I was a little kid. I just remembered that, I got to keep the and they're still tight. I had to wear my stretchy pants, but I just remembered this Sunday, I guess we have to go to noon mass as usual, but then I can't get changed. I can watch a football game or two because we're going back for Christmas Eve on the same day. Right. And that's the way it is this year. Yeah. It's like we either go Saturday for the Sunday vigil and then Sunday evening for the Christmas vigil, or we go Sunday, or we could go Sunday, Monday, or we could go as far apart as Saturday, Monday.
Right, yeah.
But we're getting a lot of church in there.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking midnight mass this year. I don't know.
There's always this sort of divide in my family. Are we going to do the 4:30 or are we going to do midnight? And it really just depends on the number of kids and the age of the kids.
Right.
If you're like I am and you have no talent, but you got to be in the Christmas Eve play at Mass, then I was third owl. That's where we're going. But
I feel sorry for those kids that were fourth and fifth owl.
Yeah, I know.
So tell us about Advent, the origins of Advent, or where it comes from. Because you know these things.
Well, it's when you start reading about Advent, the first thing that any historian is going to say, it's kind of tough to trace. And so it's always a quest to kind of find these primary sources. But you cannot have Advent until you forever set the date of December 25th for Christmas. That pretty much stands to reason because you're saying, well, how far do we have to go back from the 25th to get ready for the 25th? And we read in Clement of Alexandria, it's interesting that he doesn't really take a stand, but he says, a lot of people say it's the 25th of this month, a lot of people say it's the 25th of that month, and it's not until about 200 that we get two different historians, church historians will say, you know what? It's December 25th. And soon after they do, Constantine in 336 forever memorializes Christmas as December 25th. So by 336, you have this agreement of December 25th for Christmas. And then, really, in just a generation, you have a number of church leaders like St. Martin of Tours saying, well, we have to get ready for the coming of Christ on December 25th. And so St. Martin of Tours begins talking about a 40-day period of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. And soon after, you have a following bishop in Tours say, well, starting with St. Martin's Day on November 11th, that's going to mark our day of preparation. Mm-hmm. And in the East, you have St. Philip right around that same time. And the East wants to say, well, it's actually going to be definitely 40 days. And in the West, it volleys for about 200-300 years between the month of December or 40 days. Similar to Lent, because, and we really forget this, right? Advent, similar to Lent, and it's only second to Lent in terms of how important it is for prayer, fasting, and almsgiving.
Which is preparation.
Absolutely. Yeah. To mark Advent just the same way we would in Lent. So a lot of the things that we'll talk about in a couple months with Lent, really come up with kind of the Lent to prepare for Christ's coming.
And that's where you hear that Advent is also a penitential season.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And of course, the word Advent comes from Latin adventum. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing about that, I was mentioning this to Ron, is that adventum in Latin Bibles is used to translate the Greek word parousia, which refers to Christ's coming back.
Right.
And so we find ourselves right between Christ's coming and his coming back. And the season of Advent in both directions says, are you ready? Right? First gospel from first Sunday of Advent. Are you ready? Watch. This is Advent. And we're right between Christ's cradle and Christ's return. And Advent, the word itself, captures both sides of that.
And it's important for people to know that it's not necessarily Christ's second coming, even though we are preparing for that. But it's our own meeting of Christ at our death, presuming that we'll pass before Christ's return.
So it's our Advent.
So it's our Advent. Yeah. I mean, it's equally important because we must be ready, because we don't know when we're going to die. I mean, we could be taken at any time.
That's true.
You have to be prepared for that.
That's true. And imagine if Jesus says, so this, I'm glad you're looking out for your own soul, but how's that world of mine you left behind? How's that doing? Is that even more ready for my return? And then, oh boy, I don't know. So that's part of the almsgiving, really, is it's a wonderful way for us to prepare the world for Christ's return, just like the prayer and the fasting certainly helps the world. But it's also for us. The almsgiving is really to help the world get ready for Christ's return. And we got to do both.
So we're actually reading this. I mean, this appears in the liturgy too. Yes. I mean, the liturgy is getting, or has been getting, it's getting darker. I mean, there's more severity of what is to come. What we need to be preparing for. And I think it correlates nicely. I mean, all these things that you recognize, at some point the little light bulb comes on, and you realize that the church does things for a reason. And
absolutely.
And here we have a time of year, at least in the northern hemisphere, when December 21st, I think, is the winter solstice, and the days are getting. They're coming to the shortest. I should say, the days are becoming the shortest on the 21st, and then after that they'll start to get longer and longer. But it's interesting that it correlates with the readings. You've got very dark days. It's just, I find it interesting that I find this correlation interesting.
Yes, and that's something when you look at setting the date for Christmas. You always hear that thing, well, the Christians were just trying to mask pagan holidays, and that's not really true at all. The most you ever get is this very Jewish and Christian outreach to the world saying, I'm glad that everyone from Persia to Rome to Germany has all of these festivals of celebrating light coming into the world. You sensed something. But we have the very revelation of God, and we can fill in those shadows, right? It's not about S-U-N, it's about S-O-N. And the human being who was also the very, very light of God. So you've sensed some things with these evergreens and these feasts celebrating the days getting longer, but we're going to tell you about the real light coming into the world that we came to know ourselves right from the revelation of God.
And it's part of it, the evangelization process
Yes.
that we're all engaged in. You use something that somebody's already familiar with, and
Absolutely.
and show them the real meaning behind it.
Absolutely, and not in a harsh way, but saying, you're really smart. You got this on your own. Let me take you the rest of the way.
So do you happen to know the significance of the 25th? Because I'll take you back to what you said before, as the beginning of Advent.
Yes.
There was some discrepancy as well. It's the 25th of this month or the 25th of that. So
Yes.
what's the significance of the 25th?
Well,
Because it's one of 2 months. Then.
Yes.
They couldn't figure that out.
Sextus Julius Africanus, and I forget if it's AD 201 or 205, he reasons that the world was created on March 25th, kind of looking at Jewish tradition. And so he says, well, that must be when Christ was conceived. And so 9 months later, it must be Christ's birth. And he's the first one who really starts talking about that. And also Hippolytus of Rome, same time, will talk about December 25th. As far as we can tell, this is when Jesus was born. Somewhat for different reasons. And some people say, well, that passage was sort of manipulated from Hippolytus to create a sort of consensus. But it's from their writings that it really does hold to December 25th, such that Constantine can say, discussion's over. Now, maybe Constantine had some political motivations, but he receives it from the best authority of the church.
No, but that is fascinating.
Yes.
It's fascinating to know because there was the significance of the 25th, and again, you say it correlates to
Yes.
The belief that that the world began. It's
Yes.
on the 25th of March. So you're just moving forward 9 months.
Yes.
And you're going to take a month for a month. So you just assume it's got to be the 25th of December.
Yes.
Fascinating.
Yep, absolutely. It also reminds us, though, that the first thing that Christians talk about is Christ risen from the dead, right? It takes a while to sort of say, well, you know what? If Christ isn't back right away and the people who knew him are dying, we need to sort of pray about Christ's life as a model for our lives. And that's through when we get prayer, reflection, the guidance of the Holy Spirit, probably Mary, stories about, well, here is how Jesus was born.
Fascinating. Yeah, fascinating.
Peter Sibilio in studio with us, the Bible teacher at Lourdes and host of Bible Basics here on Annunciation Radio. You've had a couple of Advent-related questions in the last couple of weeks, and it's great to be able to learn a little bit more about all of that. When we think about Advent and the Bible, I mean, there's no set instruction in the Bible on that. But look at the readings that all, point to a preparation period.
It's kind of like you were saying. The church has been doing something for
the
last
absolutely.
2,000 years, right?
Yeah.
We have a really great exercise routine, right? You might say, I'm going to this trainer, I'm going to that trainer. That's more for after Christmas. But if you think of really what the church puts forward for us, it's just wonderful, consciously wonderful, and experience-driven training to get ready with the daily readings, trying to get to Mass. I love the O antiphons, right, that we start, I think, on December 17th, right? And in the East, right, there are some folks who say, well, the most intense period of preparation begins on December 17th, and in the West we have the great O antiphons starting then.
Let me ask you this: is that what they refer to as the second part, or this? Because I've heard Advent described as the first part and the second part. It's
the 7 days in particular. Christmas Eve that's sometimes called the preparation in Eastern churches, and I think that might be it. And again, even when you start talking about a preparation period, right, you have this tradition of maybe just 7 days, no, maybe 40 days, no, just December, and that's where our Advent of 4 weeks comes from.
I only ask because I was listening just the other day to the morning program, of course before Ron and Dave.
I was going to say you wouldn't have heard any of that profound morning offering.
But they were discussing as a doctor that had come forth with a more accurate Latin translation for a hymn.
Oh, interesting.
And it is for, if I remember correctly, it was for or intended to be used or recited during what I thought he said the first part of Advent, and I never heard of Advent referred to as parts.
Yeah, because I think it's the one that they use for the morning prayer.
Morning prayer
for the Liturgy of the Hours,
yep.
And it is a different translation, whereas the original translation was really it's cadence and rhyme.
Yes.
Versus these aren't really there to rhyme and make a nice little song out of it.
But I remember he made a point of saying that goes until the 16th of December, and then antiphons start at the 17th. I'm thinking, well, maybe that's the second part because I don't know. So I had to ask.
Definitely, if it's the 17th of December, that's kind of. We have 7 days left.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like we've had 2 weeks of penance and 1 week of joy, and now it's one more last big push. But not to the mall.
No,
right?
Which there might be a few of us struggling at the mall at that point, but
that's true. That's true.
Hopefully not the case.
But we can't light that purple candle too early.
No, that's
can
true.
We on the Advent wreath?
Mm-hmm. So, if we look at Advent in the Bible, we really don't look at it any other way, if I understand you correctly, other than looking at the liturgy. I mean, we've been practicing, or we've been, I guess, through our readings, daily readings, and the readings on Sunday. Our preparation for Advent. I mean, even though it's not, there's as Ron mentioned before, it's not called out in the Bible that this is when this starts and this is what the practice entails. But we're pulling our readings of Advent, quite profound readings, and they're all relative to one another, but they are very relative to Advent. I mean,
absolutely,
what we're trying to do in Advent.
Absolutely. Paul doesn't really talk much at all about Jesus' life. And Mark begins his gospel, certainly with the Old Testament. It's really Matthew and Luke, and through reflection, John, that we can really focus on. Maybe in the next half hour.
Yes, we'll have to pick that up in the next half.
Great place to pick it up here when we finish our break here on Faith with Reasons. Shayne Stanfield, Ron Finn, and the star of the show, Peter Sibilio.
Yeah.
Christmas star.
Yeah.
So hopefully you'll stick around, and stick around for part 2.
Every day, abortion affects the lives of thousands of women. But for every woman affected, there is a man who has also lost a child. Too often, we as men don't think we can feel hurt or sadness over this loss. But there is help, and there is hope. If you or someone you know has experience with abortion, please reach out to the Joseph Ministry at 419-299-6660 or visit CatholicCharitiesNWO.org for more information. God wants you to return to Him and to experience the love and mercy that is waiting you as His beloved Son.
Catholics acknowledge that the deposit or rule of faith is sacred scripture and apostolic tradition as manifested in the living teaching authority of the Catholic Church. In rejecting the papacy and teaching authority of the Catholic Church, the Protestant reformers thought they found the rule of faith in the Bible. Individual, private interpretation guided by the Holy Spirit. Yet the Bible denies that it is sufficient as the Church's rule of faith. Paul acknowledges that much Christian teaching is to be found in the tradition that is handed down by word of mouth in 1 Corinthians 11:2 and 2 Timothy 2, verse 2. He instructs us in 2 Thessalonians 2:15 to stand firm and hold to the traditions which you were taught by us, either by word of mouth or by letter. Examining the truths of the Catholic faith, This is faithforensics.org.
Every weekday afternoon at 3, join us for our live and interactive Divine Mercy Chaplet. Do you have something or someone you're praying for? Imagine the power of hundreds of people praying for your intention. We have several ways for you to share your request. You can visit our app and go to the prayer request button, send an email to chapletprayer@gmail.com, or call our prayer request line at 419-868-2966. Here at Annunciation Radio, we're praying for you.
Now, back to Faith with Reasons here on Annunciation Radio.
Hey, welcome back here. Shayne Stanfield, Ron Finn, and today we're blessed to have Peter Sibilio. He's Director of Theology, Assistant Professor of Theological Studies at Lourdes University, and of course, host here at a daily series called Bible Basics at Annunciation Radio. He also contributes to Social Justice in the Bible, and this is on the Catholic Charities Annunciation Radio weekly program, Faith Alive. And we concluded our first half hour talking about, Advent in the Bible. And of course, it's not something that's cited into the Bible, and a practice that was really established 200-300 years.
Yes.
Later when they nailed down the date for Christmas.
Yes.
And then
absolutely.
established this preparation time. So where is this called on the Bible? And what the church has been doing is it's been taking this time of Advent, this time of preparation, and actually using on a daily and a weekly basis these beautiful readings. Our first reading in our gospel, tying them together because we're pulling out. Currently reading Isaiah. There's a lot that's going on here, and you were saying at the conclusion of the first half, the gospel talking about Mark, and you were concluded with John, and so I'll let you take it off from there.
Well, with the really the organic development of this season of preparation, Advent. You start to see in the church during that time more and more reflections on, again, the true light coming into the world. And that's how John begins his gospel. Of course, you start to reflect on Joseph and Mary. Matthew tells the backstory through Joseph. Luke tells the backstory through Mary. And so just as we're journeying through Advent, we use those Gospels to reflect on, well, what must they be doing to get ready for the very first Christmas?
And, of course, they would have been only thinking about and reading their Scripture at the time, and at the time their Bible, was Torah, right?
Trying to get through how strange this and different and unusual this must have been, right? Matthew tells us, well, here's what Joseph is kind of going through, and here is how Mary is reflecting. And, of course, we get the Magnificat before Jesus is even born. We get big chunks of the Hail Mary just before the Magnificat on the lips of Elizabeth.
Yeah.
And so you wonder, well, how could she greet Mary as blessed among women? Since, as far as we know, she couldn't have known what has already happened, yet somehow she did, since that greeting for Mary was on her lips, even though Mary had just had this audience with Gabriel where she says yes to God. As soon as she gets to Elizabeth, which Gabriel told her about, she didn't know, Elizabeth greets her with the Hail Mary. Well, how did she know? So you can tell that the Holy Spirit is working to prepare a lot of people who are saying yes to God. And so we look at those people and what they must be doing in our reflections and in our readings as we prepare for Advent, or as we go through Advent.
So maybe we can touch on some of what would be the first readings, daily. What we're saying, because we are now beginning to read, obviously prophecy. Of the coming of Christ, and so this, again, as I referred to before, this had to be in the back of their minds, because if this is it, they knew what to expect. They just didn't know when. They were hopeful it would happen at some point, but obviously we're talking about Mary and we're talking about Elizabeth. They didn't expect it would involve them.
Probably the first time they heard Torah.
Yeah. But it's something that they were all familiar with and they were all hopeful for.
And their history, too.
Yeah.
A lot of the Magnificat comes from Hannah and Samson's mother. Now on the lips of Mary, and she probably didn't have, a cell phone where she could just draw this up. She probably wasn't taught to read, but it had meant so much to her that she was able to remember and rehash in her own heart. We hear it kind of after Jesus is 12 years old and he's lost and they go back to Galilee. Mary has to sort of, again, rehash these things in her heart. So she has this very attentive heart right from the beginning. And so she's able to recall these scriptures that have just been part of her life in trying to make sense of what seems just incredible.
Yeah. What amazing, just an amazing experience to share what they went through at that point. And of course, we're recounting that during the Christmas readings.
And of course, Matthew begins our whole New Testament with a super fast review of the whole Old Testament, where he just plugs Jesus in and says, "This is Jesus, son of Abraham, son of David. Abraham became the father of," and goes all the way up to Jesus's time. And I'll often use that. I'll say, okay, we'll see if you're ready for your Old Testament final. Turn to page 1 of the New Testament. And we don't use page numbers, but turn to the very first page in the New Testament. If these names are a little bit more familiar to you now than they were at the beginning of the semester, well, you're probably in good shape. And Matthew consciously does that to plug Jesus into the very best of all that God has been promising and doing.
Well, that's fascinating.
Well, for them, he's born into a culture where genealogy is theology.
Right.
And so when you see Matthew's genealogy, you're beginning the whole New Testament, and certainly Matthew's perspective on Jesus is saying, this is what God has been doing, and it goes right to what God is doing with Jesus, and by extension, us, the church.
Yeah, wonderful. Now, we mentioned the O antiphons, and of course, this is the beginning of the final week of Advent. And
don't even say O antiphons. I don't have my shopping done. Right? We're already on the second O antiphon, and I haven't gotten anything.
So we're trying to push this home, and it's the icing on the cake. Let's talk about what are they.
I love these O antiphons.
I'm going to defer to Ron because he really was talking at length about them, and that's when I really said, wow, these are something to talk about.
Well, and obviously they're biblical, and each
They're
day we're
Psalms.
Presented with a different perspective.
Yes.
For these 7 days.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
And they're generally chanted, right?
Yep. And they're often chanted along with, there's always a tradition of reading and rereading parts of the Magnificat. And so you hear this chant, and then you hear Mary's prayer right along with it. And so if you can't make it to church those days, try to make it at least some of the days. And you'll get them right on almost any web page, I think. You could even Google them, but USCCB, of course, kind of places them front and center those days. And so it's just a wonder. We always kind of end with, homework, and every year, since really Ron was talking about them, the O antiphons are just things we can really privately start to do now, each and every day.
Yeah, you can't read them without that tune coming to mind.
Exactly.
Come on, come Emmanuel.
Exactly.
For each of those days.
So you say they're biblical. Are we reciting for those that aren't familiar with the O antiphons? I mean, are we reciting a psalm? Are
yes.
we okay? So we're reciting psalms, and now you say you're also at the same time recalling part of the Magnificat.
Yes, usually there's this tradition of reading the Magnificat right after you hear or sing this chant.
Okay. And the chant changes every day.
Yes.
For the 7 days.
Well, certainly the words do.
Okay, yeah. I know Ron's looking it up.
Yeah, I always like to have them But again, I'm careful because I'm going to start singing them. And
as long as I don't start singing them. Right?
Oh, my. And these do come up each year, and I have seen different versions of it. They're not the same in every place, but for the most part, if you're on an official church source, they're going to match.
Yes. Methodists, Anglicans, Presbyterians, and Lutherans are largely going to share a liturgical calendar with us. And just as a side note, the very first Advent wreath was actually from Martin Luther.
Wow.
And so he definitely believed in church seasons.
Yeah.
So if we ever get, a little bit of maybe fundamentalist criticism about being too earthy, we can say, you mean like that Lutheran Advent wreath that we love so much?
We actually touched on that with a guest of a recent show, and I was kind of amazed at the number of Protestant churches out there that have borrowed the liturgical season from the Catholic Church because they see the richness in it. They see,
and especially at Christmas, the Puritans. Specifically, for a brief time under Puritan rule in England, you were fined if you got caught celebrating Christmas because it was considered too Catholic.
Oh.
And even in America, since Christmas had come back in a big way in England, Christmas was kind of looked down upon early on in America as being too English. And it really wasn't until you have a lot of Protestant churches losing membership to those Catholics because those Catholics at Christmas are so much fun.
We want to do it too.
Now that you say this, I think it's important for our listeners just to sit back and think about that. Christmas is a Catholic Church feast day.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is.
And it's really, if you think about it, it's the secular world that's hijacked our feast day for Santa Claus and the Frosty the Snowman and the whole. Well, what did I just commented on last week. I was astounded because I'd gotten into the car and of course it was the day after Thanksgiving, and the person on the radio announces, well, it's officially the first day of Christmas, and it's just it was just cringe because it's Black Friday, it's the shopping for Christmas and all, and it's like, give me a break. But that's
where's the prayer, fasting, and almsgiving?
Yeah. But that's it. Really, it's just the opposite.
Exactly.
They've hijacked Christmas.
Well,
now
you have to start somewhere because you can't secularize what's not sacramental in nature, right?
You do have to
so
start
very
somewhere.
true. But what you just said there, I think, is what brought this to mind, because that's why they would forbid it, because it's a Catholic feast day.
And it's, we keep just sort of organically this year, it sort of keeps coming up that, to really keep this tradition, we really do have to see it as second only to Lent in terms of a prayerful time of we're preparing ourselves and our world for this. And it's a little bit like these people who go crazy on Mardi Gras before Lent. I feel like saying, you realize you just signed on to 40 days in the desert after this. And that's the only reason why you're allowed to go a little crazy here. Did you read the fine print? For those beans and beignets and all that stuff. But it's absolutely the case. And in fact, Christmas wasn't even always called Christmas. It was in both East and West, Latin and Greek, as it still is, the feast of the birth of Christ. In Greek today, like you say, Kala Christougenia or Christougenia, right? Good birth of Christ to you. And in the West, of course, it's the Nativity, a good Latin word. It's not until 1066, I think, 1066, 1063, I forget my notes, but there was always this sort of tendency, maybe with the cycle of seasons, to overdo the celebration and underdo the preparation. And so the church comes out and says, remember, this Advent is a season of preparation. And the only way you can begin to celebrate is by going to the Christ Mass. That is the only way to end your fast and begin the celebration with the Christ Mass. And so that is where we get the actual word Christmas.
Yeah.
It's from, hey, don't jump the gun on Black Friday.
Yes.
Right? It is,
and to think they had that problem back in 1060.
Absolutely. The first mall.
Get out there early, get the shiniest rock available.
Yes.
And the church is so good, is so wonderful at preparing all the time. They don't. It's not a one and done with our church.
No.
We always look forward to what's coming, and then we reflect on it, and we work toward it, and then we embrace it.
Yeah.
That's true. Very true.
And I think that's, at least in our household, I'm still trying desperately to keep the decorations down and not put them up until the very, very end. I know it's a big downer especially for the kids, because, they see the rest of the family, everybody's out in a whole celebration mode, but you have such difficulty focusing on Advent when you've got Christmas music playing in the background and literally the celebration has already begun.
Absolutely.
You just drive down the street and you see the flashing lights and the big blow up whatever in the front lawn, and people have begun the celebration, and of course December 26th everything
December
comes down.
26th everything is raining, and there are those dead evergreens in the curb.
yeah, and everything comes down, and that's really the time where our celebration kicks off.
Yes, exactly. Holy Family, coronation. We're just beginning presentation of Jesus in the temple 40 days later. And then, of course, they got to get out of Dodge because Herod's on the warpath, and he kind of figures out that those magi have tricked him.
Well, speaking of the celebrations afterwards, we might as well get into that. So, we have Christmas.
Talk about jumping the gun here.
So there
is this thing called Lent, I mean, how far do we want to go?
But we do have we obviously we have Christmas Day. So the next thing that we're celebrating is the Epiphany, correct?
Well, we have Holy Family.
Holy Family.
We have Holy Day of Obligation with the coronation of Mary, January 1st.
That's New Year's Day. That's right.
Then we have Epiphany.
Then we have Epiphany.
The arrival of the Magi.
Yep. And then Christmas season concludes with the baptism officially.
Yes.
Which is the day after the Epiphany, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so that's a wonderful calendar, and I think the way the calendar falls, it's appropriate because right after Jesus is baptized, he goes into the wilderness, and I think the way our calendar falls, I think we have an early Easter this year.
Oh, so we're going to go right into Lent.
Because we pretty much have a short Christmas too, don't we?
Yeah.
Which to me doesn't make sense. If you're going to have the shortest Advent, you should have the longest Christmas.
I know.
I don't know how that works.
But somehow the retailers are happy because they have a longer time somehow between Thanksgiving and Christmas. They were saying how happy they are. And so there's that secular world.
Yeah. So as far as
it can work because if you're expecting a gift from me, I'm in a very prayerful mood. But if you're giving me a gift, you can go secular all you want.
Oh yeah,
that's pretty much it.
It's funny how that works.
I want to pray for you, but what's your shirt size?
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't know if you did we lose track of antiphons? Were you going to add something to that, or were we going to hear you sing?
I can't wait for December 17th. Because you're looking at really the different expressions, the root of Jesse and the key of David, and the various manifestations, ways to look at Christ. I think is what amazes me about it. And again, I like the tune.
Yeah, well, I know you were over there looking, and I know we changed gears and we moved on. And I thought, well, maybe Ron wanted to share something. Maybe you wanted to sing.
You also get that in the gospel reading surrounding Jesus' birth is so many allusions to Scripture. Not that God didn't already keep his promises, but that God finds a way to fill them to overflowing. In other words, Isaiah, for all he knows, could be talking about Hezekiah as, say, an Emmanuel figure, a king to be born. Little does even he know that the very words he uses, God finds a way to expand to a whole new level, that safety under Hezekiah is going to be salvation under Emmanuel, Jesus.
Oh, beautiful. So getting back to the origins of Advent, you said that it was established after it was somewhere in the 300s because Constantine established Christmas, and we know the time of Constantine was
336 is when you have this. The history of Constantine, boy, do we need notes, and his father, and the way the empire was broken up into halves, each with two people in charge of each half. And then after Constantine, his children sort of warring for power, and that sort of thing. But we know that by 336, Constantine is in control and establishes December 25th as the day of Christ's birth. And then without any edicts from Constantine, already you have the Council of Saragossa in 380 having to talk about, well, how do we prepare for December 25th? So already within a generation, this is already just bubbling up in the church east and west organically.
And of course, at the
Truly
time,
a sense of the faithful.
So were the East and West? I think you mentioned this before that there are differences, and of course there are differences today, obviously. But they were at the time they were rather consistent on coming up with a preparation time.
Yes, yes, and usually the East is always going to say, well, we came up with it first. Here it seems to catch hold in the West with greater clarity than in the East. It's not until a local council in Constantinople in the 1100s that the East is officially going to say, starting from the end of the Feast of St. Philip all the way through December 25th is our preparation, our fast that they'll call second only to Lent.
And what date specifically is tied to the Feast of?
I believe it's St. Philip, and I think that's going to be I should check my notes here somewhere.
November.
Let me see. I know I have it here. It's either the 15th or the 11th, and I get St. Martin of Tours in the West confused with St. Philip in the East.
Okay.
But I forget which one is the 15th and which one is the 11th. I want to say St. Philip is the 11th of November, and St. Martin of Tours is the 15th of November, and those become the sort of early goalposts for when should we start Lent. And then in the West, it really gets shortened to the month of December, and that's where our 4 weeks instead of 40 days comes in. Because in the East, they love 40-day fast because it can remind people of Lent.
And that might be where some of the confusion comes from is that, well, how can Lent change? You know, and it's not so much that Lent changes, it depends on more of when Christmas falls.
Yes.
As opposed to it being close to a weekend or not including the weekend. And that's where we have to make up some time because we're essentially talking about the first Sunday of December.
Yes.
Of beginning, and that's where you're saying it's the month of December. So it's recognized as that first Sunday.
In the 500s, you start to get church councils say, well, let's just keep it in this last month. And that kind of takes hold in the West as opposed to this idea, if it is a feast, if it is a fast, similar to Lent, it must be 40 days.
Okay, interesting. Yes.
So St. Martin of Tours is the 11th.
Oh, it's the 11th.
It's the 11th, okay.
I get them backwards, I tell you.
Works pretty well.
And then St. Philip is November 15th for the East. Here it is, as soon as you give it to me.
It's right there. Absolutely.
Well, I'm witness to it. There's quite a stack of papers here. So.
Oh, every year it just grows like my waistline, I am telling you. And my memory recedes like the hairline on top of it. So.
Although I see you occasionally out running around.
Do you see the bill collector behind me?
No. I knew you must be running for a reason.
That's what's coming in January.
Okay, so Christmas gift, note to self for Peter, new tennis shoes.
There you go.
That's true.
Some running shoes.
Groucho Marx glasses, something like that.
Yeah, they'll work.
I just love talking with people who've actually heard of Groucho Marx. I mean, I'll mention that in class, and if the students aren't already sleeping, they're like, well, Groucho Marx. Isn't he the guy who invented communism or something like that? You know?
So as we prepare for Christmas, obviously, the readings will change and really kind of come to fruition at Christmas and the week following Christmas. So tell us a little bit in the Bible, where Christmas, obviously we get the same readings every year.
Yes.
For the most part. So it is leading us, again, this Christmas is a time of preparation also.
Absolutely.
To a certain degree.
Absolutely.
We're joyous. We're celebrating. We're feasting.
That's
after the fasting is done, we feast, right?
That's true.
But it's also, we're kind of waiting through that point too.
That's true. That's very, very true. One thing we can look at is, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph were every bit as busy and really every bit as pressured and threatened after the 25th as before. Luke gives us a journey to Bethlehem. Matthew doesn't mention a journey to Bethlehem, but he mentions that journey from Bethlehem. Luke will say, well, Jesus is presented in the temple, but the temple isn't in Bethlehem, it's in Jerusalem. And so they have to go there. And then, of course, Joseph is told by an angel that he should leave both Bethlehem and Jerusalem and flee to Egypt, because Herod, the so-called, so named by the Roman Senate, king of the Jews, is trying to kill his son, his earthly son, Jesus. And so they're still in preparation mode. And I know that can be very, very helpful for us, that, our lives don't get easier because Jesus is with us, but they get better. They get more meaningful. And so we really, at Christmas, we think of it as an end. No, we've only just begun. That's certainly the way it is for Jesus, Mary, and Joseph.
So that was quite a hike to go from Bethlehem to...
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's interesting that we kind of see that route on the news a lot with all of the fighting.
Yes.
We see that same sort of highway that they might have traveled. And, sometimes we'll, especially in the Old Testament, read some fairly challenging or graphic passages about, a woman in Judges being cut up into 12 pieces, and people will say, well, how can that be in the Bible? It's as bad as our headlines today, and we're getting it wrong. How could something be a warning to us in the Bible, and we're still having it in our headlines?
Oh, yeah.
3,000 years later, what have we learned from Christ and Christmas?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's tough. It really is. But, boy, make it a joyous season.
It can't be over already.
I know, it
got to
goes
be
so fast.
4:30, right?
I know, it's pretty quick. But Professor Pete, always a pleasure, and you always give us a lot to think about that. Yeah, a lot of food for thought there.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, always gets the juices flowing. So
yeah, thanks for getting us ready. Next week, Father Dwight Longenecker will be with us, author of The Secret of the Bethlehem Shepherds.
Yeah.
We had him on recently on another book, and I can't wait to talk about this one coming up. But Peter, thank you so much. We'll be listening for more great information
wait to hear that.
on Bible basics.
Maybe I'll run into you at the grocery store again.
Thanks for listening to Faith with Reasons here on Annunciation Radio.